Garage! Welcome back to Brutal Garage. Thanks for tuning back in. This episode we're going to install a PVC catch can system to our 2017 Lotus Evora S. Let's get right into it. Okay, this is a normal PVC system without the catch cans on the left. The PVC gases are expelled out of the valve covers through the PVC valves and then eventually run back into the intake systems, which are burned through the engine combustion process along with everything else out the exhaust. This is okay, but eventually what ends up happening is you do get a oil film on the inside of the intake and other parts, top of the intake valves, and this eventually leads to gumming and clogging and deposits and other things. It gets a lot worse in high-performance applications such as a blown motor, where you have a lot more pressure on top of the cylinder. You're going to get more blow-by going past the rings. So you're going to get more of these gases on the supercharged or turbocharged application. So on this side, on the right side, we have the catch can system plumbing. Very simple. It just runs in line to the regular PVC. So coming out of the valve cover, you come out of the PVC, you go into the bottom of the catch can, where it goes through a series of baffles, and the oil droplets in the vapor are scrubbed from the vapor. The remaining gases are returned much cleaner, free of this oil vapor, and now you get a much cleaner PVC gas entrance into your intake system. This prevents gumming, this prevents deposits on top of the intake valves, manifold, and anything else that's associated with the intake system. So you can see by scrubbing these fumes, you get a much cleaner intake charge. And that leads to more power because that's taking up less room in the cylinder. Okay, before we get started, let's look at the completed install here. If you notice, the big aluminum hinge at the top right corner has to swing down and clear those hoses on top of the can. And that's going to make us change a couple of fittings and the way we route things and how we put the hoses onto the motor. We're going to get into that in just a second. Another view of the completed install, you'll see how the hoses are laying pretty flat up against the side of the motor and the firewall, not eating into any vertical space of the window. That's really important. Here you can see the bracket installed in between the hinge and the body. You do this one bolt at a time so you don't have to loosen up the entire deck lid. These are the original fittings that come with the universal kit. The two lower fittings, the return lines, are all usable, but to make a much cleaner installation and to clear the hinge, we're going to have to replace those nipple fittings with AN fittings so we can keep the hoses nice and straight. More on that later. On the intake plenum side, you'll notice I have a hose cut here with a right angle brass fitting. That's so I don't have to put a heavy bend into the hose because the hose is rather stiff and I want to keep that hose tucked in nice and straight with the other hoses. Here's a close-up of the part with the factory clamp on it. Brass is okay, but in an engine compartment we're going to kind of make it a little more automotive by spraying some Alumiblast spray paint on it from Eastwood Company. This will give it a more OEM look. Okay, let's look at the routing of the hoses now. They're all tucked away nice and tight. The upper hoses are the returns to the motor. You have a small one and a large one going back into the intake system. The one with the elbow we just painted, that's coming from the valve cover on the front side of the engine. On the back side of the engine, it's coming from underneath the supercharger, and we're going to show you how that splices in here in a couple of photos. Just a side note, you can see a piece of hosing that's cut in half that's been actually gooped to the top of that return hose to keep that clamp from rubbing through the rubber hose. They got a little too close for comfort, so I gave it a little more protection. Here is the other line coming out of the other valve cover just underneath the supercharger. So what we do here is, rather than pull the supercharger, we splice into this line with a double-ended barb, put a couple of clamps on it, tuck it back underneath the supercharger, run the line back up to the cans around the driver's side of the motor, and let it run with all the other hoses along the firewall, meeting up with the catch can. Looking from the bottom up, we can see the return fittings going into the catch cans And what we did was we got rid of those nipple fittings and replaced them with the appropriate sized AN fittings and barbs. This makes everything a lot tighter. I can keep the hoses very tight and straight, and it just works out a whole lot better. If you look at the top, you can see the supply lines going back to the intake system from the top of the cans, the scrubbed gases coming out of the top. And you can see how one of the smaller lines is wrapped around the backside of the bigger line, and that is basically to clear the hinge that's going to swing down right in front of that Radium logo on that bracket that you see, the RA, the little tiny RA. That's pretty much it. Here's a good side view of the completed installation. You can see the brackets, and if you look all the way at the top of the photo, you can see how that hinge is going to swing down and need that clearance we were talking about. Okay, one last item. If we look at the top of both catch cans, you can see right next to the fittings, more to the right, these little knurled handles or knobs. Those are the knobs for the dipsticks to check the oil level. Okay? Now we can run remote drains out of this car without ever having to remove the cans to drain them, but in this case we chose not to do that. If you have to drain the cans, if they fill up too much, you pop the fittings loose and you just drain the cans. Another way is to use an evacuator and just suck the oil out and you'll be fine. But that's something I wanted to mention because it's something you can do when you do the install, even though we chose not to do it. You can have a remote drain if you want. Anyway, that's about it for the 2017 Lotus Evora 400s catch can installation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it didn't leave too many questions for you, but if you do have any questions, please contact me. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and hit the bell if you want to get updates when we do another video. Once again, thanks for tuning in to Brutal Garage.